At this point, I want to introduce our featured speaker, Carol Yost, who is the director of the Women's Empowerment Program at the Asia Foundation. Carol actually had early experience in Pakistan. She lived in Karachi at the very beginning of her career in the late 1970s and responded strongly to the way that girls and women were treated, particularly those who were deprived of education, rights, and the ability to escape abusive situations. She worked in the Middle East and on Middle East issues for the first decade of her career, where she saw the impact of the serious inequalities that women suffered, how girls and women's low status denies them the opportunity to be able to contribute to social, economic, and political life in their countries. In 1989, she was invited to join the Asia Foundation, and it was there that she had an opportunity to launch a major girls and women's empowerment program. As senior director of this program, she oversees all of the foundation's programs to advance women across the Asia-Pacific region in conjunction with the 18 field offices that the Asia Foundation supports. She's now based in Washington, D.C. She works to develop programs that further women's political participation, legal rights, education, and economic opportunity, and to support efforts that combat violence against women and trafficking of women and children. She works closely with women leaders and women's organizations throughout Asia to build networks and create sustainable resources for women. She has worked in so many countries, just to mention a few: Afghanistan, Nepal, Pakistan, Vietnam, Mongolia, Cambodia, Nepal, and China. Before I invite Carol to the podium, I just want to mention that, time permitting, we will have time for just a few questions after her address. And so with that, Carol, I'd like to welcome you up.
Thank you, Rich. And I want to thank Cindy very much for coming down to meet me, and Bonnie, who was the first person to contact me. In fact, she left a voicemail on my answering machine, a voice message on my answering machine, and then sent me an email. And for the minute she contacted me, I was very intrigued because this combines key interests of mine and really the whole thrust of my career, which is empowering girls and women in Asia and around the world. So I'm very pleased to be here tonight. I wanted to come and celebrate with you, celebrate with this congregation what you have accomplished and the contribution you're making, to, not only to individuals, but to their families and their societies. The chance to gain education, I know from my 30 years of work in the developing world, makes an enormous contribution to transform the lives of the girls who are given the opportunity, the extraordinary opportunity that you are providing, and it has a cascade of benefits, long-standing benefits, in all aspects of the societies in which they're able to function. Rich mentioned that I had the opportunity to work in Pakistan early in my career, in my 20s. I had actually gone on the experiment in international living to India when I was 19, and it was that experience that made me realize that I needed to have a career in international development. So when I graduated from college, I first went to the Middle East, and then went back to graduate school. And then one of my first jobs was a UN development program city planning project in Karachi, Pakistan. And that was my first time in Pakistan, in the in the 70s, a long time ago. And it was really that experience that set me on my life's work, on the career that I have pursued for the last 30 years, because I was able to travel around the country in my work, gathering information on all the local and budgets to try to understand the needs of the country in its cities, what that meant for the largest city in Karachi. But what overwhelmed me in that, can you hear me? What overwhelmed me in that time when I was living in Pakistan was how horribly girls and women were treated. It was, even though I traveled a lot in different regions and worked in the Middle East, where certainly women don't have the same rights and status as men in many countries, it was in Pakistan that the serious abuses were so apparent, where women were not treated, in some cases, not as well as the animals, because animals are assets. They are seen as assets, whereas girls and women are seen as liabilities and treated accordingly. And in Pakistan, as in other countries where there are these entrenched prejudices, the birth of a girl is not an occasion for celebration. It is an occasion for mourning. People give condolences when a girl is born, whereas they celebrate when a boy is born. So that was, I went from Pakistan to Saudi Arabia. And this was also in my life. I'd come out of the women's lib movement for my generation, where we were demanding equal pay for equal work, equal rights in all aspects, using the legal system to achieve that. And then the contrast with that, with what I was experiencing in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and other countries where I lived, was almost disorienting, But it catalyzed in me a realization that there was nothing more important that I could contribute to than empowering girls and women and giving them opportunities to be able to reach their full potential and contribute to their families and societies. So I have had the privilege for 26 years of directing the Women's Empowerment Program at the Asia Foundation. And as Rich said, we work across Asia. We're in 18 countries on the ground. Almost all of our 800 staff are in Asia. They're Asian nationals who are experts in the areas that we work in, including girls' education and women's empowerment. And over the years, I have come to the conclusion that with all of the different development interventions, that if there is a silver bullet that will catapult countries ahead, accelerate their development, it is education of girls and women. So why is education so important? I mean, these countries need just about everything. These very poor countries, they need clean water, they need roads, they need all kinds of infrastructure, electricity, health care. So why education? Why do I think education is so important? Well, education isn't just about learning to read and write. It is about learning critical life skills, such basic skills as understanding hygiene, nutrition, basic health care, and developing skills to be able to earn a living and lift for women to be able to lift themselves and their children and families out of poverty. Education is also about developing critical thinking skills so that women can solve problems, their own problems. And so many women that I've met over the years have, well, when they're in the midst of getting an education, they've said in various ways that I never thought I could solve any problems. Not my own, not my communities, not my families. But now I feel that I can contribute and I can make a difference. And education is proven to be a foundation of human resource development and is critical to alleviating poverty and to enhancing the general quality of life of people. It is a key foundation. We've heard about the importance of AWA. I've actually visited it. I have met some of the outstanding professors there. But you saw from the photographs that Korean women started at about the same point that many women in Asia today are still at, that they did not have the same opportunities, that these systems were about educating men, not women. And for many years, the development community has not embraced girls' education as the silver bullet that I believe it is, because there was not adequate research, there was not adequate data to show what the impact of educating girls is. Rich talked about the state of Kerala in India, which has remarkable statistics, not only on girls' education, but on all sorts of other benefits that state has enjoyed. It has a higher per capita income. It has lower mortality rate of children and people, and yet knowing that did not translate for a long time into really concrete information that categorically establishes that educating girls and women has a profound impact. So now we have the studies, and yet still in the world today, girls' inability to access education remains a serious problem around the globe. There are 600 million girls living in the developing world, and sadly 2/3 of the world's uneducated children are girls. In the Asia-Pacific region where I work and where you have initiated your program, it is home to 3/4 of the world's illiterate population, the vast majority of whom are female. So we ask, well, how could that be in the 21st century when we know a lot about the impact of this? And the fact is that there are multiple barriers to girls' access to education, with poverty being a key factor, not just for girls, but also for boys. And although there have been huge gains in eliminating poverty around the world, I read a statistic recently saying that 2 billion people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 20 years, which is an enormous achievement. However, there are still serious pockets of desperate poverty around the world. School fees, even in countries where there supposedly is free education, there are many hidden fees. They have to buy their books, their uniforms. Sometimes the teachers require payments. In the whole urban-rural divide is a serious setback for those living in rural areas, as there aren't enough schools, and often the schools are far away from their homes, and it is a long walk, and often for girls it can be a dangerous walk where they're subject to or vulnerable to being abused, and so their parents opt to keep them home in so many cases. So and in some of the countries where we've worked, we've actually given girls bicycles so that they can pedal to school and get there faster because their parents are willing to let them stay in school if they have a bicycle. And we see the girls that lack education and opportunities are very vulnerable to exploitive labor, child labor, and to trafficking, which is an enormous, egregious human rights scourge of of our times. Hundreds of thousands of women and girls are trafficked around the globe every year, and Asia is very much involved in that illicit criminal activity. In some countries, we've seen the rise of private schools who have tried to pick up this gap. But of course, that's only for the children of the affluent, again, leaving behind poor children and poor youth. If we're looking at how can you tell whether a country is making progress in its education of its children, boys and girls, you need to look at the amount of public expenditure that is allocated annually. And on average, spending as a percent of total government spending reveals a significant disparity, for instance, between South Asia, where your program is working, and its neighbors in Southeast Asia, which have been catapulted ahead and now have a much higher literacy rate and female literacy rate in most Southeast Asian countries than in South Asia. Today in the South Asia region, the female literacy rate is only 50% for women versus 73% for men. And in Pakistan, it's even lower. Pakistan and Afghanistan have some of the lowest female literacy rates in the world. Pakistan, I think, depending on the source, female literacy is about 30 to 40%, versus almost 70% for men. So there's a big gender gap in South Asia, with, again, boys being privileged over girls if a family has to choose who to send to school. The UN Human Development Report in 2011 listed Pakistan in the category of low human development countries. Pakistan has ranked 145th in the world in terms of human development. So when I saw that you were working in Pakistan, there is almost no country in the world where I feel it is more important to invest in girls' education. So I was very anxious to come here and meet you and learn why you had supported this endowment. I've seen the pictures of the girls who are part of that. It's very moving to see the investment that you all have made. And I know how valuable it is. The girls in Pakistan, as in other countries still, suffer from entrenched patriarchal systems. And girls are disadvantaged from birth to death, and everything from nutrition. Girls and women in many families eat after the men and boys have finished. And that causes nutritional deficiencies that stunt their physical and mental development. There was a poster in Nepal that it was such a stark look at what this really looks like. It is a picture of a woman with a boy and a girl twin. And the boy is this fat, happy, roly-poly little infant. And the girl is barely recognizable as a human. It's more like a chicken because she's only nursed after the boy has had everything he wants to eat. It's just, nothing could be a more starker image of the discrimination. And in many South Asian countries, educating girls is still seen as a waste of money because girls marry and they go to the husband's family and they do not stay and support the parents. So the parents don't want to invest in their education. They would rather keep them home to babysit and do chores. They don't see the benefit of it. So that leaves millions of girls and women caught in a vicious cycle of illiteracy, poverty, ill health, early marriage, sexual violence, and discrimination that have negative consequences not only for them, but for their societies as a whole. I've often thought that if the international donor community and governments around the world had recognized the importance of educating girls 20 or 30 years ago, we would live in a very different world. Korea is just a marvelous example, because Korea in the 50s was as poor as many of the countries in South Asia are today. And yet the investment was made in education for boys and for girls, and of course now it's one of the more developed countries in the world. The same is true of Japan. Investment in education. Singapore. And you can eat off the sidewalk in Singapore, but in the 50s Singapore was poor and people were basically on the edge of starvation if they were not starving. Education has transformed these societies. So what do we know about the benefits associated with girls' education? Well, they include reduction of child and maternal mortality, improvement of child nutrition and health, lower birth rates, enhancement of women's domestic role, and their ability to participate in public and political life, so their voices are part of decision-making processes. It improves their economic opportunities and productivity, and protection of girls from HIV/AIDS, abuse, and exploitation is linked to their education level. So the debate over whether it's a good investment to invest in educating girls is really over. There's so many studies now. Finally, we have the evidence that investing in girls makes a profound difference. Children of women who have completed primary school are 40% less likely to die before the age of 5. A woman with any education is 50% more likely to have her child immunized. When a girl in the developing world receives 7 or more years of education, she marries on average 4 years later and has 2.2 fewer children, and her children are healthier and are more likely to attend school. Educated women send their children to school. It's one of the first investments they make when they have any extra money. And an extra year of primary school boosts girls' eventual wages by 10 to 20%, and an extra year of secondary school, 15 to 25%. Some of the studies have shown that investment in girls' education has raised the GDP of an entire country. That's important information. It's important for all of us who work in the developing world. It's been very important in, made in the UN, in all of the international donors who are finally putting girls' education as a priority. It was one of the Millennium Development Goals, girls' education, girls' universal education, in recognition of how important this is, and finally the proof is there. You all are investing in tertiary education, and for so many girls and women, I mean, if girls make it to secondary school, that already is a huge hurdle, because there's an enormous dropout rate after primary school. Of course, some girls don't even make it through primary school, but then they fall off like flies dropping off in secondary school for a whole variety of reasons, some of which I've mentioned. So the ones that make it through secondary school, the poor girls who make it through secondary school, have an amazing tenacity and will and determination to get an education, or they would not get that far, given all the barriers. So girls' education, what you're investing is indisputably one of the most powerful levers for sustainable positive change in any society. So I came here tonight. It's actually, it's my wedding anniversary, June 8th. I've been married a long time. This is my 45th wedding anniversary. And my husband is in Indonesia on a scuba diving trip with our son. So when I looked at the date of this invitation, I thought, well, really, if I can't spend this evening with my husband, there's nothing I'd rather do than come and meet all of you who are kindred spirits with me in understanding the importance of investing in girls' education. So I am really thrilled to be here and to join you in solidarity for what you have achieved, for what you are doing it seems like a small way perhaps, but those are the seeds of revolution in these countries. These are the seeds of change and really the greatest hope for fundamental transformation of these societies for a better life for all. I've been in and out of Pakistan for 40 years, and I've seen there is, of course, a very educated elite group in Pakistan from the ruling families, but the universal education has not yet come to Pakistan, and it is all the more important that Pakistani girls have role models, that they see women who are getting an education, a secondary education, and amazingly a tertiary education. They are role models, and they are tomorrow's leaders, and this society so desperately needs this. So you have the wonderful opportunity that not really that many people have in life, I find, which is that you're making a difference in real people's lives. You are making dreams come true. These girls, poor girls in Pakistan and many other countries, can only dream of going to university. And it is a far-fetched dream for most that never comes true. So your Asian endowment that is now focused on Pakistan, educating girls in Lahore at the Foreman Christian University, is an important step, an important country, and important for girls everywhere. So I wanted to take the occasion of my 45th wedding anniversary to make my own contribution to the Asian Endowment, because I believe so much in what you're doing. I know how important it is, and I'm thrilled to join you in what you're achieving and your commitment, which is awesome.